The October afternoon was perfect, the kind that makes mothers grateful for suburban backyards and the simple joy of watching their children play. Sarah Mitchell stood at her kitchen window, phone pressed to her ear, watching 3-year-old Emma push herself on the pink swing set. Back and forth, those little legs pumping with determination, blonde pigtails bouncing with each arc through the air. Emma's laughter drifted through the screen door, mixing with the rustle of autumn leaves. "I'll call you back, Mom," Sarah said, smiling as Emma waved at her from the swing. "Emma's outside and I should." The words died in her throat. The phone call had lasted maybe 3 minutes, perhaps 4. Sarah hung up and glanced outside again, expecting to see her daughter still swinging, still laughing, still safe in their fenced backyard in their quiet Columbus, Ohio neighborhood. The swing moved gently in the breeze, empty. "Emma," Sarah called, walking to the back door. No response. "Emma, honey, where are you?" The yard was silent except for the creak of the empty swing. Sarah's heart began to pound as she stepped outside, her eyes scanning every corner. The pink plastic slide stood empty. The sandbox was undisturbed. Emma's favorite stuffed rabbit, the one she never went anywhere without, lay abandoned in the grass near the fence. "Emma," Sarah's voice cracked as panic seized her chest. She ran to the small wooden playhouse, throwing open the door. Empty. She checked behind the shed, behind the bushes, calling her daughter's name with increasing desperation. "Emma, this isn't funny. Come out right now." The fence. Sarah's blood turned to ice. The gate was still latched from the inside, but as she ran along the perimeter she saw it. A small shoe print in the soft dirt outside the fence, and next to it, Emma's favorite sneaker. The little purple one with the light-up unicorn on the side. Sarah Mitchell's scream shattered the peaceful suburban afternoon at exactly 3:47 p.m. Within minutes, the Mitchell home transformed into the epicenter of every parent's worst nightmare. Sarah's hands shook so violently she could barely dial 911. Her husband, Michael, was in a meeting downtown when he got her hysterical call. He broke every speed limit racing home, his mind cycling through scenarios, each worse than the last. The first police cruiser arrived in 6 minutes. Officer Jenny Park found Sarah on her knees in the backyard, clutching Emma's stuffed rabbit and sobbing. "She was right there," Sarah kept repeating. "She was right there. I looked away for 3 minutes. 3 minutes." "Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to focus," Officer Park said gently but firmly. "What was Emma wearing?" "Pink, a pink jacket with flowers, blue jeans, one purple sneaker, we found it by the fence, white shirt with a rainbow." Sarah's voice broke. "She's 3 years old. She just turned 3 in August. She's so small." By 4:15 p.m., Detective James Rodriguez arrived on scene, a 20-year veteran with the Columbus Police Department who had worked more missing children cases than he cared to count. He knew the statistics that haunted every detective. The first 3 hours were critical. After that, the chances of finding a child alive dropped dramatically with each passing hour. Rodriguez immediately called for K-9 units, additional patrol cars, and activated the Amber Alert system. Within minutes, Emma's face would be on every phone, every highway sign, every television screen in Ohio. Her cherubic features, those bright blue eyes, that gap-toothed smile from a photo taken just days earlier at her preschool, would become seared into the public consciousness. The neighborhood began to swarm with activity. Doors opened as residents emerged, first curious, then horrified as they learned what happened. Police officers went door to door, asking if anyone had seen anything, anyone suspicious. Patrol cars blocked off streets. Yellow crime scene tape went up around the Mitchell's backyard. Michael Mitchell arrived home at 4:42 p.m. to find his quiet street transformed into chaos. Satellite trucks were already pulling up. His wife sat on their front steps, wrapped in a blanket despite the mild weather, rocking back and forth. When she saw him, she collapsed into his arms. "I looked away," she sobbed into his chest. "I just looked away for a second." As sunset approached, Officer Rachel Chen arrived with Max, a 5-year-old German shepherd with an extraordinary record. Max had been instrumental in finding 12 missing children over his career. Officer Chen, a dedicated K-9 handler, had worked with Max since he was a puppy, and she trusted his nose more than any piece of technology. Max was given Emma's blanket from her bedroom, the one she'd slept with every night since she was born. He pressed his powerful nose to the fabric, inhaling deeply, committing her scent to memory. Then Chen gave him the command, "Find." Max moved methodically through the backyard, his tail straight, his body focused. He went directly to the fence line where Emma's shoe had been found. His nose worked the ground, then the fence itself. He whined, a sound that made Chen's stomach drop. The scent trail was there, but it was faint, confused. As darkness fell over Columbus, portable lights were set up around the Mitchell property. Volunteer searchers began arriving, neighbors, church members, complete strangers who'd seen the Amber Alert. They organized into grid search teams, fanning out across the neighborhood with flashlights and Emma's photo. But Detective Rodriguez had already noticed something troubling. Behind the Mitchell's fence, partially hidden by overgrown grass, were fresh tire tracks, wide ones, like from an SUV or van. They didn't match any vehicle belonging to the Mitchells or their immediate neighbors, and they led away from the fence line toward the street behind their property, a route that would have avoided the front of the house entirely. Someone had planned this. As the first night descended, Sarah Mitchell sat in her daughter's bedroom, still clutching that stuffed rabbit, while outside her window, the search for Emma intensified. Max continued working, Officer Chen following his lead into the growing darkness, neither willing to give up. The clock was ticking. The command center was established in the Mitchells' living room by 9 p.m. Detective Rodriguez had seen this transformation dozens of times, a family home becoming the nerve center of a desperate search, intimate spaces invaded by strangers with badges and grim expressions. Maps covered the coffee table where Emma had eaten breakfast that morning. Radio chatter filled rooms that should have held a child's laughter. Sarah Mitchell hadn't moved from Emma's bedroom. She sat on the small bed surrounded by stuffed animals, her daughter's favorite blanket pressed to her face, breathing in the fatting scent of baby shampoo and innocence. Michael stood in the doorway, his face gray with shock, fielding calls from family members while trying to hold himself together. Outside, the search had expanded to a half-mile radius. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through the nearby woods, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness like desperate searchlights. They called Emma's name until their voices went hoarse. Max had picked up traces of her scent leading toward the main road, but then it vanished, suggesting she'd been put into a vehicle. At 10:37 p.m., Detective Rodriguez received information that made his blood run cold. "Detective," Officer Park approached him quietly, her face pale. "We've got something. David Hendricks lives 3 blocks north on Maple Street." Rodriguez knew that name. Every detective in Columbus knew that name. David Hendricks, 42 years old, registered sex offender. Convicted in 2012 of attempted kidnapping of a minor. Served 6 years, released on parole in 2018. And according to the database Officer Park showed Rodriguez, Hendricks had violated parole conditions twice in the past 6 months, once for being near an elementary school, once for failing to report a change in employment. "Please tell me he has an alibi," Rodriguez said, though he already knew the answer from Park's expression. "He says he was home alone all afternoon, no witnesses, and Detective," Park pulled up a photo on her tablet. "His vehicle is a gray Ford van, matches the tire tracks behind the Mitchell's fence." Rodriguez's jaw clenched. He'd worked enough of these cases to know that jumping to conclusions could destroy an investigation. But he'd also worked enough to know that when a convicted predator lived 3 blocks from a missing child and had no alibi, you acted fast. "Get a warrant now. I want his house torn apart." The raid on Hendricks' residence began at 11:45 p.m. 7 police vehicles descended on the modest ranch house with the overgrown lawn. David Hendricks answered the door in a stained t-shirt and sweatpants, his thinning hair disheveled. When he saw the badges, his face went blank. "David Hendricks, we have a warrant to search your property," Rodriguez announced. "What's this about?" Hendricks' voice was flat, emotionless. "A 3-year-old girl disappeared this afternoon. Emma Mitchell. You know the Mitchells." Something flickered in Hendricks' eyes. "I've seen them around. I don't know them." "Where were you between 3:30 and 4 p.m. today?" "Here, home, alone." Hendricks crossed his arms. "I didn't take any kid." While Rodriguez questioned Hendricks on the front lawn, forensic teams swarmed through the house. They photographed everything, bagged potential evidence, searched for any sign Emma had been there. In the garage, they found the gray van. The tires were measured, photographed, compared to images from the scene. They matched. In Hendricks' bedroom closet, investigators found a pair of work boots. The tread pattern matched a partial print found in the soft dirt near where Emma's shoe was discovered. But there was no sign of Emma. No child's clothing, no toys, no blonde hairs, no direct evidence she'd ever been in that house or that van. "We're bringing you in for questioning," Rodriguez told Hendricks at 1:20 a.m. "I want a lawyer," Hendricks replied immediately. By 2 a.m., the story had exploded across social media. Emma's face was everywhere. The news that a sex offender lived near her home spread like wildfire. Angry residents gathered outside the police station where Hendricks was being held. Someone spray-painted "Monster" on his garage door. But Rodriguez felt uneasy. Something didn't fit. Hendricks was the obvious suspect, too obvious. His reactions during questioning were odd, detached, but not guilty. He seemed genuinely confused about the tire tracks, the boot prints. And there was something else bothering Rodriguez, the surveillance cameras. The Mitchells had a simple home security system, 2 cameras, one covering the front door, one facing the backyard. Both had mysteriously malfunctioned between 3:30 and 4 p.m., the exact window when Emma disappeared. The cameras started working again at 4:15 p.m. "Could be coincidence," Officer Park suggested when Rodriguez mentioned it. "I don't believe in coincidences," Rodriguez muttered. "Someone knew about those cameras. Someone disabled them remotely or cut the power. Hendricks doesn't have that technical skill. He barely figured out how to use a flip phone during booking." Meanwhile, Officer Chen and Max continued searching through the night. Max was tireless, his nose working constantly, following faint traces of Emma's scent that led toward the industrial area east of the neighborhood. Chen had learned to trust Max's instincts implicitly. When he pulled in a certain direction, there was always a reason. At 2:30 a.m., they reached an abandoned warehouse district. Old manufacturing buildings sat dark and empty, scheduled for demolition but forgotten by the city in red tape. Max's tail went rigid, his alert signal. He pulled harder on the leash. "What is it, boy?" Chen whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her weapon. Max moved purposefully between buildings, his nose pressed to the ground. The scent was stronger here, fresher. Chen's radio crackled. "All units continue search grid pattern. No signs of the subject." But Max wasn't following any grid. He was following Emma. Back at the Mitchell home, Sarah finally emerged from Emma's bedroom at 3 a.m. Her face was swollen from crying, her voice barely a whisper. "Is she alive?" she asked Detective Rodriguez. "Please, just tell me the truth. Is my baby alive?" Rodriguez wanted to give her hope, wanted to lie and say everything would be okay. But he'd learned long ago that false hope could be crueler than hard truth. "We're doing everything we can," he said. "We have our best people out there. We won't stop looking." It wasn't the answer Sarah wanted, but it was the only honest one he could give. Somewhere in the darkness, Max pressed forward, following a scent trail that was about to lead to a miracle. Officer Rachel Chen's legs ached. She'd been walking for 19 hours straight, following Max through neighborhoods, parks, and now this desolate industrial wasteland on the east side of Columbus. Most handlers would have called it quits hours ago, would have taken their dog home to rest. But Chen had seen something in Max's behavior, an intensity, a certainty that made her push through exhaustion. The abandoned warehouse district loomed before them like a graveyard of failed businesses. Broken windows stared down like empty eyes. Graffiti-covered brick walls. Weeds pushed through cracked pavement. This area had been thriving once, manufacturing hubs that employed hundreds. Now it was a forgotten corner of the city, scheduled for demolition that never seemed to come. It was 2:47 a.m. on the second night of Emma's disappearance. 36 hours since she'd vanished from her backyard. Max suddenly stopped dead, his entire body going rigid in a way Chen had never seen before. His ears pinned back. A low whine escaped his throat, not his usual alert signal, but something different, something urgent. "What is it, boy?" Chen whispered, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. Max lunged forward with such force that the leash burned Chen's palm. She had to run to keep up as he pulled her toward a 3-story brick building with Riverside Manufacturing faded on the side. The front entrance was chained shut, covered in no trespassing signs. But Max wasn't heading for the front entrance. He circled to the side of the building where a rusted metal door hung partially ajar. The chain that should have secured it had been cut recently, judging by the bright metal visible on the cut ends. Max squeezed through the gap, and Chen followed, her heart pounding. "Max, slow down," she commanded, but the dog was beyond commands now. He was on a mission. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of darkness. Chen's flashlight beam revealed empty corridors, offices stripped of everything valuable, water damage staining the walls. The smell of mold and decay was overwhelming. Max's claws clicked on concrete as he moved with purpose through the building, turning corners as if he'd been here before. They reached a hallway lined with storage rooms. Max stopped at one door, solid metal, newer than the rest, with a heavy padlock that looked recently installed. He scratched at it frantically, whining, then barking, something he rarely did. "Emma," Chen called out, pressing her ear to the door. "Emma Mitchell, can you hear me?" Silence, then so faint Chen almost thought she'd imagined it, a small sound, a whimper. "Officer needs assistance," Chen screamed into her radio, giving their location. "I think we've found her. I need bolt cutters now." The response was immediate. Within minutes, Chen heard sirens approaching. Detective Rodriguez arrived first, sprinting through the warehouse with bolt cutters in hand. It took 3 attempts to break the heavy padlock. When it finally gave way, Rodriguez threw open the door. The flashlight beams revealed a nightmare. Emma Mitchell was curled in the corner of the small storage room, barely conscious. Her pink jacket was gone. She wore only her rainbow shirt and jeans, one foot bare where her shoe had been found. Her lips were blue. Her skin was deathly pale. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just stared at them with vacant, terrified eyes. "Oh God," Rodriguez breathed. "Get the paramedics in here now." Chen rushed to Emma, wrapping the tiny girl in her jacket. Emma's body was ice cold. "You're safe now, sweetheart, you're safe. We've got you." Max pressed close, whining softly, as if understanding the gravity of the moment. The child didn't respond. She was limp in Chen's arms, her breathing shallow. Paramedics arrived and immediately began treating Emma for hypothermia and severe dehydration. They wrapped her in warming blankets, started an IV in her tiny arm. "We need to move fast," the lead paramedic said. "Her core temperature is dangerously low." As they rushed Emma out on a stretcher, Rodriguez's team secured the crime scene. The storage room was mostly empty, just a dirty blanket, some empty water bottles, and scattered granola bar wrappers. Whoever had taken Emma had kept her alive, at least. But why? And where were they now? The ambulance screamed toward Columbus Children's Hospital, Sarah and Michael Mitchell racing behind in their car. They'd gotten the call at 3:15 a.m. "We found her. She's alive." Those 3 words, "she's alive," were all that mattered in that moment. The hospital emergency room was ready. Doctors swarmed Emma the moment she arrived, working to stabilize her body temperature, check for injuries, assess the damage. Sarah sobbed as she watched through the window, Michael's arm around her shoulders. "Mrs. Mitchell," a doctor emerged after 45 minutes that felt like 45 years. "Emma is stable. The hypothermia was severe, but we got to her in time. Physically, she appears unharmed. No signs of sexual assault, no major injuries. She has some bruising on her wrist, dehydration, but she's going to survive." Sarah collapsed against her husband. "Can we see her?" "Of course, but I need to prepare you. She's not responding to us. She won't speak, won't make eye contact. This level of trauma in a child this young, it's going to take time." They led Sarah and Michael into the pediatric ICU. Emma lay in a bed that seemed enormous around her tiny body, connected to monitors and IVs. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. "Baby girl," Sarah whispered, taking Emma's small hand. "Mommy's here, you're safe now." Emma's eyes moved to her mother's face. For one brief moment, recognition flickered there. Then she looked away, her hand limp in Sarah's grasp. Over the next 3 days, doctors ran every test imaginable. Child psychologist Dr. Lisa Yamamoto was brought in, a specialist in childhood trauma. She spent hours with Emma, using toys, art, gentle conversation. But Emma remained locked in silence. "It's called selective mutism," Dr. Yamamoto explained to the devastated parents. "The trauma was so severe that Emma has essentially shut down her ability to communicate. She can speak physically, there's nothing wrong, but psychologically she can't or won't." "Will she ever talk about what happened?" Rodriguez asked during one of his visits. He needed Emma's testimony. Without it, they had no case. "Maybe, with time, therapy, patience. But detective, you need to understand, Emma is 4 years old. Even if she does speak, getting coherent testimony from a trauma victim this young is." Dr. Yamamoto trailed off, shaking her head. Meanwhile, the case against David Hendricks was falling apart. His lawyer had provided more evidence. Hendricks' van had been in a shop getting brake work done the day before Emma disappeared. There were security cameras proving it. The tires had been changed. The matching tire tracks were from old tires no longer on his vehicle. And Hendricks had actually been at a parole officer appointment from 3 to 3:45 p.m. the day Emma vanished, something he'd been too scared and confused to mention initially. Rodriguez sat in his office at midnight reviewing the evidence board. If Hendricks didn't take Emma, who did? Someone with access to the warehouse. Someone who knew the Mitchell's security system. Someone who had planned this carefully. The real kidnapper was still out there. And Emma, the only witness, couldn't tell them who. 6 weeks after her rescue, Emma Mitchell still hadn't spoken a single word about her ordeal. Dr. Lisa Yamamoto sat across from the little girl in her bright, cheerful office filled with toys and books designed to make children feel safe. Emma played with a dollhouse, moving the tiny figures room to room with methodical precision. But when Dr. Yamamoto gently asked about the bad place or the scary time, Emma would freeze. Her small hands would stop moving. Her eyes would go distant, vacant, like she was somewhere far away. "Emma, sweetheart, can you show me with the dolls what happened?" Dr. Yamamoto tried, her voice soft and patient. Emma's response was always the same: silence. She'd set down the toys and curl into a ball, her thumb finding its way to her mouth, a habit she'd abandoned 2 years ago but had returned to since the kidnapping. The trauma had fundamentally changed her. The bubbly, talkative toddler who once narrated every moment of her day was gone. Emma would speak occasionally now, whispered words to her mother at bedtime, single-word responses to direct questions. But about the kidnapping itself, she was completely mute. Sarah Mitchell was watching her daughter disappear before her eyes. Emma had nightmares every night, waking up screaming but unable to explain what she'd seen. She refused to go outside. She panicked if Sarah left her sight for even a moment. The therapy sessions, the medications, the endless patients, nothing seemed to help. "Is she going to be okay?" Sarah asked Dr. Yamamoto after one particularly difficult session. "Eventually, with time and support, yes," the psychologist assured her. "But Emma may never be able to testify about what happened, and honestly, Mrs. Mitchell, forcing her to could cause more harm than good." That answer was devastating for more than just Emma's parents. In the prosecutor's office downtown, Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh was building a case that was rapidly crumbling to dust. She spread the evidence across her conference table: crime scene photos, forensic reports, witness statements. It looked impressive until you realized how little of it actually mattered. David Hendricks had been released 3 weeks ago. His alibi had checked out completely. The tire tracks everyone thought were the smoking gun. They matched thousands of vehicles in Columbus. The boot print was a common brand sold at Walmart, and surveillance footage from his parole officer's building showed him in the waiting room during the exact time Emma was taken. "We arrested the wrong man," Walsh said to Detective Rodriguez during their weekly case review. "And now we look like idiots." Rodriguez rubbed his tired eyes. He hadn't had a full night's sleep since this case began. So who did take her? That was the question haunting everyone. The warehouse where Emma was found had been owned by Riverside Manufacturing until they went bankrupt in 2017. Since then, it had changed hands twice, caught in legal disputes. The current owner was a real estate investment company in Chicago that claimed they hadn't been to the property in years. But someone had access. Someone had put that new lock on the storage room door. Someone had left those granola bars and water bottles, keeping Emma alive for a reason that remained chillingly unclear. Rodriguez had compiled a list of persons of interest. Marcus Alvarez, 38, former maintenance supervisor at the warehouse, fired 6 weeks before Emma's disappearance for stealing copper wire, had keys to the building that were never returned. His whereabouts during the kidnapping were unclear. He claimed he was job hunting, but no one could verify it. Thomas Reed, 51, a neighbor of the Mitchells who had acted strangely during the initial search. Security cameras showed him watching the search efforts with what witnesses described as inappropriate interest. He had no criminal record but had been fired from a teaching job years ago under circumstances the school wouldn't discuss. And most concerning, someone with advanced technical knowledge had disabled the Mitchell security cameras remotely. The IT forensics team determined the system had been hacked using sophisticated methods, not something your average criminal could pull off. "We're missing something," Rodriguez told his team during a briefing. This was planned meticulously. Whoever took Emma knew the family's routine, knew about the cameras, knew about that warehouse. This wasn't random. But without Emma's testimony, they had nothing concrete on anyone. Ada Walsh faced an impossible decision. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for April. She could present what evidence she had, but any defense attorney would tear it apart. No eyewitnesses, no DNA evidence, no confession, no victim testimony. "We need Emma to identify her abductor," Walsh told the Mitchells during a painful meeting in her office. "I know that's the last thing you want to hear, but without it, whoever did this walks free." Michael Mitchell's face reddened with anger. "You want to traumatize our daughter more, put her on a stand in front of the monster who took her." "I don't want to," Walsh said quietly. "But I have to consider justice here, not just for Emma, but for the next child this person might take." Sarah held her husband's hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. "She can't speak. How is she supposed to testify if she can't speak?" It was Officer Rachel Chen who suggested the solution, almost by accident. She'd been visiting Emma regularly at the hospital and then at home, bringing Max with her. The bond between the traumatized girl and the rescue dog had grown into something remarkable. Max seemed to understand Emma's pain in a way humans couldn't. When Emma had nightmares, only Max could calm her down. When she curled into her silent ball, only Max could coax her out. During one visit, Chen watched Emma whisper into Max's ear, the most words she'd strung together in weeks. The girl's small arms were wrapped around the dog's neck, her face buried in his fur. "He makes her feel safe," Chen told Dr. Yamamoto, who was documenting the interaction. "It's like she trusts him completely." Dr. Yamamoto's eyes widened. "Officer Chen, there's actually research on this. Courthouse facility dogs, specially trained animals that provide emotional support to traumatized witnesses during testimony. It's been used successfully in several states." "You think Emma could testify with Max beside her?" "I think it might be the only way she could testify at all." The idea was radical. When Ada Walsh proposed it to Judge Patricia Thornton, the judge's initial response was a flat, absolutely not. "Your Honor, this isn't without precedent," Walsh argued, presenting case files from Washington, Arizona, and Hawaii, where courthouse dogs had been used with child witnesses. "The research shows it significantly reduces trauma and helps children feel safe enough to speak." "It's prejudicial," countered the public defender representing the interests of any future defendant. "A police dog in the courtroom creates bias. The jury sees a K-9 officer and associates it with guilt." "Max wouldn't be in his K-9 vest," Walsh countered. "He'd be in a therapy dog bandana, and if we don't do this, a child predator goes free." Judge Thornton took 2 weeks to decide, reviewing the legal precedents, consulting with child psychology experts, and weighing the rights of the accused against the needs of a traumatized 4-year-old victim. Finally, she made her ruling. "I'm going to allow it, but the dog must be out of sight of the jury during entrance and exit. He can only be visible when Emma is on the stand. And if I determine at any point that this is prejudicing the proceedings, we stop immediately." It was a landmark decision, but it meant nothing if they couldn't figure out who to put on trial. Rodriguez stared at his evidence board late one night, looking at the 3 suspects' photos. Somewhere in this tangle of facts and dead ends was the truth. And somehow, a 4-year-old girl and a German shepherd were going to have to find it. 3 months after her rescue, Emma Mitchell's world had shrunk to the size of her bedroom. She refused to go to preschool, refused to play outside, refused to be alone even for a minute. The vibrant little girl who once danced through the house singing Disney songs now spent hours staring silently at the wall, trapped in a prison of her own trauma. But there was one exception to Emma's withdrawal from the world: Max. Officer Rachel Chen had started bringing Max to visit twice a week, initially just to check on the girl he'd saved. What happened next surprised everyone. The moment Max entered the house, Emma would transform. Her vacant eyes would brighten. She'd unfold from whatever corner she'd wedged herself into and rush to him, throwing her small arms around his neck. "Hi, Max," she'd whisper, words she wouldn't say to anyone else. Dr. Yamamoto documented these visits meticulously. During one session, she watched Emma play with Max for an hour, speaking to him in hushed tones, telling him things she wouldn't tell her parents or therapists. "He's the only one who understands," Emma whispered to the dog, her fingers twisted in his fur. "He found me in the dark place. He saved me from the bad man." The bad man. It was the first time Emma had acknowledged the kidnapper's existence. Dr. Yamamoto caught Chen's eye, both women barely breathing. "Emma, sweetie," the psychologist said gently, "can you tell us about the bad man?" Immediately, Emma shut down. Her hands stilled. Her eyes went vacant again. She pressed her face into Max's side and wouldn't speak another word for the rest of the session. "She was about to tell us something," Chen said afterward, frustrated. "She's so close." Only with Max, Dr. Yamamoto observed. That dog represents safety to her in a way nothing else does. He was there in her darkest moment. He brought her back to light. In Emma's mind, Max is her protector, her hero, the only one she can trust with her secrets. That observation planted a seed that would grow into Ada Jennifer, Walsh's controversial strategy. By late March, the case was falling apart. Marcus Alvarez, the fired maintenance worker, had been questioned extensively. He had opportunity. He'd kept keys to the warehouse. He had possible motive. He'd been fired and might have targeted a random family in rage. But his DNA wasn't in that storage room. His fingerprints weren't on the new lock. And 3 witnesses, including his sister, swore he'd been helping her move apartments the afternoon Emma was taken. Thomas Reed, the strange neighbor, had been cleared too. His inappropriate interest turned out to be crippling anxiety about his own grandchildren's safety. He'd been watching the search with fear, not pleasure. The technical expert who'd hacked the security cameras remained a ghost. No digital footprints, no trace of how they'd accessed the system. Without Emma's testimony identifying her kidnapper, they had nothing. "We need her on that stand," Walsh told Rodriguez during yet another frustrating strategy session. "She's our only eyewitness. She saw who took her. She spent 36 hours with this person. She knows." "She's 4 years old and traumatized into silence," Rodriguez shot back. "How exactly do you plan to make that happen?" Walsh pulled out Dr. Yamamoto's reports. "The dog, Max, it's the only time she opens up. What if we bring Max into the courtroom?" The proposal ignited a firestorm. Defense attorney Robert Cunningham, appointed to represent the interests of any potential defendant, exploded when he heard the idea. "A police dog. In my courtroom. That's the most prejudicial thing I've ever heard. The jury sees a K-9 unit and automatically assumes guilt. It's a police dog, for God's sake. You might as well put a neon sign saying 'guilty' over my client's head." "He wouldn't be presented as a police dog," Walsh argued during the preliminary hearing. "Max would be in a therapy dog vest, clearly marked as a support animal. There's precedent. Precedent in tiny county courts with rinky-dink cases," Cunningham interrupted. "This is Franklin County, Ohio. We have standards. We have rules. And those rules don't include bringing animals into criminal proceedings to manipulate jury emotions." Judge Patricia Thornton listened to both sides argue for 3 hours. Legal precedents were cited. Child psychology experts testified. Dr. Yamamoto explained the research on courthouse facility dogs and how they'd been successfully used in 7 states for child witnesses in abuse cases. "These dogs don't testify," Dr. Yamamoto explained to the judge. "They don't influence the evidence. They simply provide emotional support that allows traumatized children to feel safe enough to speak. Without Max, I can tell you with professional certainty that Emma will not testify. She physically cannot. The trauma response is too severe." "And with the dog?" Judge Thornton asked. "With Max beside her, there's a possibility, not a guarantee but a real possibility, that Emma might be able to tell us what happened." Cunningham wasn't done fighting. "Your Honor, this sets a dangerous precedent. What's next? Therapy cats, emotional support parrots. Where does it end?" "It ends with justice for a 4-year-old who was kidnapped and held in a warehouse for 36 hours, Walsh fired back. "We're not talking about a violent criminal who can defend himself. We're talking about a traumatized child who is our only witness to a serious felony." Judge Thornton took the matter under advisement. For 2 agonizing weeks, both sides waited. During that time, Chen brought Max to visit Emma every other day. The bond deepened. Emma started sleeping with one of Max's spare bandanas clutched in her hand. She'd drawn pictures of him, crayon sketches of a big brown dog with kind eyes. In her nightmares, when she dreamed of the dark room and the bad man's voice, Max would appear in the dream and save her, just like he had in real life. "He's my hero," Emma whispered to her mother one night. He found me when I was lost. Sarah Mitchell called Dr. Yamamoto immediately. She's talking more. Still not about the kidnapping, but more words, more connection. The dog is helping. On April 15th, Judge Thornton issued her ruling. After careful consideration of the legal precedents, the expert testimony, and the unique circumstances of this case, I am going to allow the use of a courthouse facility dog during the testimony of the minor witness, Emma Mitchell. The courtroom erupted. Cunningham immediately filed an objection. Walsh smiled for the first time in months. The judge held up her hand for silence. However, I am imposing strict conditions. The dog will not be visible to the jury during entrance or exit. He will wear a clearly marked therapy dog vest, not a K9 police vest. He will remain still and quiet at all times. And if I determine at any point that the dog's presence is prejudicing the jury rather than simply supporting the witness, I will remove him immediately. This is about allowing a traumatized child to testify, nothing more. Rodriguez closed his eyes in relief. They had their chance. Now they just needed to figure out who to put on trial. The preliminary hearing was set for May 1st. They had 2 weeks to identify a suspect, build a case, and prepare a 4-year-old girl to face her nightmare in court. Officer Chen visited Emma that evening with the news. "Emma, sweetheart, you know how you talk to Max about the scary things?" Emma nodded, her hand buried in Max's fur. "Well, there might come a time when Max goes with you to a special place, and some grown-ups will ask you questions. Max will be right there with you the whole time. Would you be able to answer their questions if Max was there?" Emma looked at Max, as if asking his opinion. The dog gazed back at her with those steady, calm eyes that had become her anchor. "Will Max protect me?" Emma whispered. "Always," Chen promised. Emma considered this, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but only if Max comes." It was the most hope anyone had felt in 3 months. May 12, 2020. The Franklin County Courthouse was under siege. News vans lined every available parking space. Reporters jostled for position on the courthouse steps. Security had been tripled. The case of the People versus Thomas Reed had captured national attention, not just for the crime itself, but for what was about to happen inside that courtroom. Thomas Reed, the Mitchells' neighbor, had been arrested 2 weeks earlier when new evidence emerged. A partial fingerprint on one of the water bottles found in the storage room. It wasn't enough to guarantee conviction, but combined with his suspicious behavior during the search and some concerning items found during a warrant search of his home, including detailed knowledge of security systems, prosecutors felt they had enough to proceed. Reed sat at the defense table in an ill-fitting suit, his face pale and drawn. He'd maintained his innocence from the moment of his arrest, claiming the fingerprint meant nothing. He'd done maintenance work at that warehouse years ago, had touched dozens of items there. His attorney, Robert Cunningham, had built a defense around reasonable doubt. But everyone in that courtroom knew the case would hinge on one thing: whether a 4-year-old girl would point at Thomas Reed and say, "That's him." Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh sat at the prosecution table, her stomach churning with anxiety. Everything depended on the next hour. She glanced at her notes one more time, then at the clock. 9:47 a.m. Emma was scheduled to testify at 10:00. The gallery was packed beyond capacity. Judge Thornton had allowed limited media access, 2 pool cameras, no flash photography. Sarah and Michael Mitchell sat in the front row, holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white. Behind them, dozens of spectators who'd waited in line since 5 a.m. to get a seat. And scattered throughout the courtroom were the witnesses who'd been called to testify about the warehouse, the property manager, the real estate company representative, and Marcus Alvarez, the former maintenance supervisor who'd been cleared of suspicion, but subpoenaed to testify about building access and security. Alvarez sat in the back row, fidgeting with his tie. He looked uncomfortable in his dress clothes, kept checking his watch like he had somewhere else to be. Rodriguez had noticed him arrive late, slipping in just before the session began. "All rise," the bailiff announced. "The Honorable Judge Patricia Thornton presiding." Everyone stood as Judge Thornton entered, her expression grave. She knew the weight of what was about to happen. "Please be seated. Before we begin today's testimony, I want to address the unusual circumstances we're about to witness." The courtroom was silent, every eye on the judge. "Today we will hear testimony from a minor witness who has experienced significant trauma. In accordance with my previous ruling, a trained therapy dog will be present to provide emotional support. I want to make this absolutely clear to the jury. The presence of this animal is solely for the comfort of the witness. It has no bearing on guilt or innocence. You are not to draw any conclusions from the dog's presence. Is that understood?" The 12 jurors nodded, though several looked skeptical. "Mr. Cunningham, do you wish to renew your objection?" Judge Thornton asked. The defense attorney stood. "For the record, yes, Your Honor, but I understand the court has ruled." "So noted. Bailiff, please bring in the witness." The courtroom doors opened, and Officer Rachel Chen entered first, Max walking calmly at her side. The German Shepherd wore a blue vest clearly marked "Therapy Dog" in large white letters. His tail was down, his demeanor professional but gentle. A collective murmur rippled through the gallery. Then Emma appeared, and Sarah Mitchell's hand flew to her mouth. The little girl looked impossibly small standing in that doorway. She wore a yellow dress her mother had picked out, the color of sunshine, meant to be cheerful. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She clutched a stuffed rabbit, the same one that had been found in her backyard the day she disappeared. Emma's eyes were huge, terrified, scanning the crowded courtroom. She froze in the doorway, her breathing quickening. Dr. Yamamoto, standing behind her, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, Emma," Dr. Yamamoto whispered. "Look, Max is here." Emma's eyes found the dog, and something in her posture changed. She took a tentative step forward, then another. Max's tail wagged slightly, the only sign of emotion he'd shown. Officer Chen guided Max to the witness stand area where a small chair had been set up for Emma. Next to it was a cushion on the floor for Max. Chen gave him the command to sit, and he settled onto the cushion, his brown eyes never leaving Emma's face. Emma climbed onto the chair with Dr. Yamamoto's help. Her feet didn't reach the floor. She looked so vulnerable, so tiny in that formal courtroom setting. Immediately, her hand dropped down to rest on Max's head, her fingers curling into his fur. The dog leaned into her touch. "Emma," Judge Thornton said softly, her normally stern voice gentling, "do you know why you're here today?" Emma nodded, not speaking. "Emma, sweetheart, I need you to answer out loud so everyone can hear. Can you do that?" "Yes," Emma whispered, so quietly the court reporter had to lean forward. Ada Walsh approached slowly, careful not to spook the child. "Hi, Emma. My name is Ms. Walsh. We've met before, remember?" Another tiny nod. "Emma, I'm going to ask you some questions about last year, about October. Is that okay?" Emma's hand tightened in Max's fur. The dog pressed closer to her chair. "Okay," she whispered. Walsh took her through the preliminary questions carefully. "What's your name? How old are you? Do you know what it means to tell the truth?" Emma answered in monosyllables, her voice barely audible even with the microphone. Then Walsh asked the critical question. "Emma, do you remember the day you were playing on your swing set and someone took you away?" The courtroom held its collective breath. Emma's entire body went rigid. Her face paled. For a moment it seemed like she would shut down completely, retreat into the silence that had protected her for months. But then Max did something remarkable. Without any command from Chen, he lifted his head and rested his chin on Emma's knee, looking up at her with those steady, calm eyes. The simple gesture said, "I'm here. You're safe. You can do this." Emma looked down at Max, drew a shaky breath and nodded. "Yes," she whispered, "I remember." The gallery erupted in whispers. Judge Thornton gavelled for silence. "Emma, I know this is hard," Walsh continued, her voice gentle. "But I need you to tell us, do you remember the person who took you?" "Yes," barely a breath. "Emma, this is very important. Is that person here in this courtroom right now?" Time seemed to stop. Every person in that room leaned forward slightly. Sarah Mitchell grabbed her husband's hand. Thomas Reed's face went gray. The jury watched intently. Emma's eyes lifted from Max, beginning to scan the courtroom. Her gaze moved across the faces, the judge, the jury, the prosecutor, then toward the defense table where Thomas Reed sat frozen. Her eyes moved past him, across the gallery, past her parents, toward the back rows. And then Emma's small body went absolutely rigid. Her hands stopped moving in Max's fur. Her breath caught audibly in the microphone. She saw him. Emma's finger rose slowly, trembling, pointing toward the back of the courtroom. Her face had gone deathly pale. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. Max immediately sensed her distress, sitting up straighter, pressing against her leg. "Emma," Ada Walsh prompted gently, following the child's line of sight. "Who do you see?" The courtroom had gone absolutely silent. Every head turned, trying to follow Emma's pointing finger. Thomas Reed sat frozen at the defense table, confusion spreading across his face. He wasn't sitting in the back. Emma wasn't pointing at him. Detective Rodriguez, standing near the side door, felt his pulse spike. Something was wrong. Emma was pointing at the witness gallery at the back row where— "Bad man," Emma whispered. Then louder, her voice cracking with terror, "Bad man." Her finger was pointed directly at Marcus Alvarez. The former warehouse maintenance supervisor sat in the back row, his face draining of all color. For one frozen second, nobody moved. Then Alvarez's eyes widened with panic, and he bolted from his seat. "Stop him!" Rodriguez roared, lunging toward the back of the courtroom. Chaos erupted. The gallery exploded with shouts and screams. Reporters jumped to their feet. Jurors gasped. Alvarez shoved past the people sitting next to him, knocking an elderly woman into the aisle as he scrambled toward the exit. But Rodriguez was faster. He tackled Alvarez 3 feet from the door, slamming him against the wall. "Marcus Alvarez, you're under arrest." "Get off me. I didn't do anything." Alvarez struggled, but 2 uniformed officers converged on him, forcing his arms behind his back. Judge Thornton was on her feet, gavel pounding. "Order, order in this court." At the witness stand, Emma had dissolved into terrified sobs, her face buried in Max's fur. The dog had stood up on the platform, his body positioned protectively between Emma and the chaos, a low growl rumbling in his chest, the first sound he'd made. Officer Chen was there instantly, wrapping her arms around both Emma and Max. "You're safe, Emma, you're safe. He can't hurt you." Dr. Yamamoto rushed forward, helping lift Emma from the chair. Sarah Mitchell had already vaulted over the gallery railing, running to her daughter. "Baby, I'm here. Mommy's here." Meanwhile, Alvarez was being dragged toward the side door, handcuffed, his face a mask of panic and rage. "This is insane. That kid doesn't know what she's saying. She's 4 years old." Rodriguez leaned close to Alvarez's ear. "She's 4 years old and she just identified you as her kidnapper. You're done." Thomas Reed stood at the defense table, his mouth hanging open in shock. His attorney, Robert Cunningham, looked equally stunned. "Your Honor, my client, what just happened?" Judge Thornton gavelled again for order. "This court is in recess. Clear the courtroom. Bailiff, remove the jury. Everyone out now." The courtroom descended into controlled chaos as security ushered people out. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed despite the rules. Sarah Mitchell sat on the floor, rocking Emma in her arms while Max stood guard, his eyes tracking Alvarez until the man disappeared through the door. In the holding room, Rodriguez and Walsh immediately began emergency questioning. while Alvarez's public defender was scrambled to the scene. "I want a lawyer," Alvarez kept repeating. "I'm not saying anything." "You don't have to say anything," Rodriguez said coldly. "That little girl just said everything for you." But they needed more than Emma's identification. They needed evidence. Rodriguez called the forensics team. "I want Alvarez's DNA compared to every sample from that warehouse. I want his apartment torn apart. I want his life under a microscope. Go." 2 floors below, in a victim's advocate room, Emma clung to her mother and Max, still crying but calmer now. Dr. Yamamoto sat with them, speaking in soothing tones. "Emma, you were so brave," Dr. Yamamoto said softly. "You did the right thing. The bad man can't hurt you anymore." He took me," Emma whispered between sobs. "From the backyard, he said he had a puppy. I wanted to see the puppy." Sarah's heart shattered, the oldest trick in the predator's book. "Oh, baby." "But there was no puppy. He put me in his car. It was dark. I was scared. He took me to the big building and locked me in the room." Emma's words came faster now, months of trauma pouring out. "It was so cold, so dark. I called for Mommy, but nobody came." "But Max came," Dr. Yamamoto reminded her gently. "Max found you." Emma looked at the dog, her arms wrapping around his neck. "Max saved me. He's my hero." Upstairs, the evidence was falling into place with stunning speed. The forensics team had rushed back to the warehouse with new eyes, specifically looking for anything connected to Marcus Alvarez. Within 3 hours, they found what they'd missed before. A cigarette butt in the alley behind the warehouse, Alvarez's DNA. A partial palm print on the interior door handle of the storage room, Alvarez's print. Security footage from a gas station 3 blocks from the Mitchell home, timestamp 3:42 p.m. on October 15, 2019, showing Alvarez's beat-up Honda Civic driving past. More security footage from 2 days before the kidnapping, showing Alvarez driving slowly past the Mitchell house multiple times, clearly surveilling. By 6 p.m., Rodriguez sat across from Alvarez in an interrogation room. The man's public defender looked ill. The evidence was overwhelming. "Here's what we know," Rodriguez laid out photo after photo. "You were fired from the warehouse 6 weeks before Emma's disappearance. You kept the keys. They were never returned. You were angry, probably desperate for money. You started planning." Alvarez stared at the table, his jaw clenched. "You surveilled the Mitchell family. You learned their routine. You figured out Emma played outside every afternoon. You hacked their security cameras. We've got digital forensics working on that right now, and we will prove it." Rodriguez leaned forward. "On October 15th, you grabbed Emma from her backyard. You told her you had a puppy. You drove her to the warehouse you still had access to. You locked her in that storage room." "Why?" Walsh interjected, her voice sharp. "What was the endgame, Marcus? Ransom? Were you going to ask for money?" For the first time, Alvarez looked up. His eyes were hollow, defeated. "I needed money," he said quietly, the fight draining out of him. "I lost everything when I got fired. My apartment, my car payments, everything. I thought if I took the kid, the rich family would pay to get her back." "The Mitchells aren't rich," Rodriguez said coldly. "They looked rich, nice house, nice cars." Alvarez's voice cracked. "I wasn't going to hurt her. I left her food, water. I was going to send a ransom note, but then the whole city went crazy. Police everywhere. K9 units, helicopters. I got scared. I couldn't go back to the warehouse. I couldn't let her go. I didn't know what to do." "So you just left her there," Walsh said, disgust dripping from every word. "You left a 3-year-old child locked in a freezing warehouse for 36 hours. Alvarez put his head in his hands. "I panicked. I didn't mean for it to go that way. When I heard the police found her, I was relieved. I thought no one would ever know it was me." "But Emma knew," Rodriguez said. "She saw your face, and today she was brave enough to tell us." The confession was recorded, witnessed, and ironclad. Marcus Alvarez was formally charged with kidnapping, child endangerment, and a list of other felonies that would put him away for decades. That night the news exploded across every network. The dramatic courtroom identification, the confession, the resolution. Emma Mitchell's courage became a national story. In her bedroom, Emma slept peacefully for the first time in 7 months, her hand resting on Max's head. The dog had been given special permission to stay the night, a hero's reward. Tomorrow there would be more questions, more legal proceedings, more therapy. But tonight, a little girl and her rescue dog rested, knowing the bad man was locked away. Justice had finally found its voice, in 2 simple words from a brave 4-year-old. Bad man. 6 months after that dramatic courtroom moment, Marcus Alvarez stood before Judge Patricia Thornton for sentencing. The courtroom was packed again, but this time the atmosphere was different, not tense with uncertainty, but heavy with the weight of justice about to be served. Alvarez had pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for avoiding a lengthy trial. His attorney had advised him that fighting was pointless. Emma's identification, his confession, the mountain of forensic evidence all pointed to inevitable conviction. The only question now was how long he'd spend in prison. Mr. Alvarez, Judge Thornton's voice was ice. You targeted an innocent child in a premeditated kidnapping. You surveilled her family, planned your crime with calculated precision, and then abandoned that little girl in a freezing warehouse where she could have died. The trauma you inflicted will echo through Emma Mitchell's life for years to come. Alvarez stood with his head bowed, showing no emotion. You are sentenced to 45 years in the Ohio State Penitentiary, with no possibility of parole for 30 years. In addition, you will be registered as a violent offender for life. Judge Thornton's gavel came down with finality. Take him away. As Alvarez was led out in shackles, Sarah Mitchell felt a weight lift from her chest. Michael squeezed her hand. In the victim's advocate room down the hall, Emma played with Max, unaware of the sentencing but safe in the knowledge that the bad man was gone forever. Thomas Reed's exoneration had come swiftly after Alvarez's arrest. The fingerprint on the water bottle was explained. Reed had indeed done some volunteer work at the warehouse years earlier as part of a community cleanup program. His suspicious behavior during the search had been genuine anxiety for Emma's safety, colored by his own history of childhood trauma that made him hypervigilant about children's welfare. Mr. Reed, on behalf of Franklin County, I apologize, Ada Walsh had told him privately. We pursued the evidence where it led, but that doesn't erase what you went through. Reed had been gracious, understanding even. You were trying to find Emma. I get it. But the experience had aged him. He'd lost his job due to the publicity, and several neighbors still looked at him with suspicion despite his complete exoneration. He eventually moved to a different city, seeking a fresh start where people didn't whisper when he walked by. The wrongful prosecution led to policy changes in how suspects were identified and charged, particularly in high-profile child abduction cases. It was a cold comfort, but perhaps Reed's ordeal would prevent future injustices. For Emma, healing was not a straight line but a winding path with setbacks and breakthroughs. Dr. Yamamoto continued weekly therapy sessions, and slowly, so slowly, Emma began to reclaim pieces of her childhood. She returned to preschool 3 months after Alvarez's arrest, with Max visiting once a week as part of a new therapy program. The other children loved the police dog who saved Emma, and Max's visits became the highlight of everyone's week. Emma blossomed around her peers, her giggles gradually returning as she learned to play again. The nightmares didn't disappear overnight. There were still nights when Emma woke screaming, when the dark seemed too heavy, when she couldn't shake the memory of that cold storage room. But Sarah and Michael were there, and increasingly, Emma could talk about her fears instead of drowning in silence. The bad man is in jail, she'd tell herself at bedtime, clutching Max's therapy bandana that Officer Chen had given her. Max saved me. I'm safe now. Officer Rachel Chen and Max became permanent fixtures in the Mitchell family's life. Chen had expected to move on to other cases, other searches, but the bond between Max and Emma was too important to sever. She arranged her schedule to visit regularly, watching with quiet pride as the traumatized little girl she'd pulled from that warehouse transformed back into a joyful child. Max received a commendation from the Columbus Police Department, the highest honor a K-9 officer could receive. The ceremony was attended by hundreds, including Emma, who presented Max with his medal. The photo of a smiling 4-year-old hanging a medal around a German shepherd's neck made the front page of every newspaper in Ohio. More importantly, Max's role in Emma's testimony sparked a movement. Judge Thornton's landmark decision to allow a courthouse facility dog opened doors across Ohio and beyond. Within a year, 6 other counties had implemented courthouse dog programs. 2 years later, Ohio passed legislation formally recognizing the use of therapy animals in courtrooms for traumatized witnesses, particularly children. Emma Mitchell became the face of that change, though her parents carefully guarded her privacy as she grew older. Reporters wanted interviews, documentary makers called, advocacy groups asked Sarah to speak. She declined most requests, prioritizing Emma's healing over publicity. But Sarah did accept one invitation, to speak at a conference on childhood trauma and the criminal justice system. Standing at that podium, looking out at judges, prosecutors, and child advocates, she told Emma's story. "My daughter found her voice because a dog made her feel safe," Sarah said, her voice strong despite the tears on her cheeks. "That's not weakness, that's not manipulation, that's understanding trauma and meeting a child where she is." Max didn't testify. Max didn't influence the jury. Max simply stood beside a terrified little girl and said, "You're not alone." And that made all the difference. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. 3 years after her rescue, Emma Mitchell was 7 years old and thriving. She still saw Dr. Yamamoto monthly, still had occasional nightmares, still sometimes needed extra reassurance. The trauma would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her entire story. She'd learned to swim, joined a soccer team, made best friends with a girl named Sophie who lived 2 houses down. She laughed easily now, sang off-key to Taylor Swift songs, and had recently announced she wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. "So I can help dogs like Max." Max had retired from active K-9 duty at age 8, and Officer Chen had adopted him officially as her personal dog. But he still had one very important job, being Emma's friend. Every Saturday, Chen would drive Max to the Mitchell house, and Emma would throw open the door with a squeal of delight. "Max!" The now gray-muzzled German shepherd would trot inside, tail wagging, to spend the afternoon playing with the little girl he'd saved. They'd read books together, Emma practicing her 2nd-grade homework while Max dozed beside her. They'd play in the backyard, the same backyard where Emma had been taken, now reclaimed as a place of joy instead of trauma. On Emma's 7th birthday, the Mitchells threw a party in their backyard. The same swing set stood there, no longer a reminder of horror but restored to its purpose, making children happy. Emma swung high, her laughter ringing out, while Max lay in the shade nearby, ever watchful, ever protective. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, the same window where she'd stood that terrible October day, and watched her daughter play. The fear never completely left. She checked on Emma more than necessary, kept the fence locked religiously, had installed a security system that couldn't be hacked. But she was learning to breathe again, to trust the world again, to let Emma be a child again. "She's going to be okay," Michael said, wrapping his arms around his wife. Sarah nodded, watching Emma call Max over to push her on the swing. The dog obliged, gentle as always, and Emma's delighted shriek filled the air. "Yeah," Sarah whispered, "she really is." That night after the party ended and Emma was tucked into bed, she asked her usual question. "Mommy, can Max come to my school again next week?" "I'll ask Officer Chen," Sarah promised, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Mommy," Emma's voice was sleepy, "I'm glad Max found me." "Me too, baby, me too." "And Mommy, I'm not scared anymore. Well, sometimes I'm a little scared, but then I remember I was brave once, so I can be brave again." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You were so brave, Emma. You're my hero." "Max is my hero," Emma corrected, already drifting off to sleep. "But maybe I'm brave too." "You absolutely are." Down the street, Officer Rachel Chen sat on her couch with Max's head in her lap, scrolling through photos from Emma's party. The bond between a rescue dog and the girl he'd saved had changed both their lives, had changed courtroom procedures across the state, had proven that sometimes justice needs a gentle touch and 4 paws. Chen's phone buzzed with a text from Rodriguez. "Another county just approved a courthouse dog program. Emma's case keeps making waves. That kid changed everything." Chen smiled, scratching Max behind his ears. The old dog sighed contentedly, dreaming whatever dreams retired heroes dream. "Good boy," Chen whispered. "You saved more than one life that night, didn't you?" Outside, the Columbus night was peaceful. Somewhere across the city, a 4-year-old's testimony had become legend, a cautionary tale about jumping to conclusions, and an inspiring story about courage coming in unexpected forms. Emma Mitchell had pointed at the bad man and frozen a courtroom with 2 words. But more importantly, she'd found her voice again, learned to heal, and proven that even the smallest survivors can achieve the greatest victories. And Max, loyal, brave, gentle Max, had been there every step of the way, a reminder that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear fur and answer to "good boy." Sometimes they save lives just by sitting beside someone who needs to know they're not alone. And sometimes 2 words are enough to change everything: bad man. But even more powerful are 2 different words, whispered by a little girl to her canine hero on quiet Saturday afternoons: "Thank you." The end.